The song is Wasting My Time from an upcoming new album by Sarah Borges. That guitar work is Eric Roscoe Ambel. Eric played lead guitar with the original lineup of Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. He went on to play with a long line of musicians and bands including the Yahoos, the Del Lords, and Steve Earle. In 1999, Roscoe inaugurated Cowboy Technical Services in Brooklyn. Producing, mixing, playing guitar and keyboards and other instruments for the likes of Sid Straw, Mojo Nixon, Nils Lofgren, Emmylou Harris, Marshall Crenshaw, and the Bottle Rockets. Eric is a busy guy. I was thrilled he took the time to talk guitar. You're listening to Frets with DJ Fey. No lessons, no technique info. I just talk to people who play guitar. Stay tuned. Well, Eric, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure, Dave.
When I was a kid, I took some guitar lessons at a local music store after a failed attempt at playing trumpet in the school band. I was really awful. My heart just wasn't in it, and I gave up fairly quickly. But I was eager and excited to learn guitar. So yeah, I was pretty young, but I did take lessons, and I got to a point where I realized I could listen to a record and figure out what chords and notes they were playing and so on. You, if I understand right, you played trumpet before taking up the guitar as well, right?
Yeah, I started with the piano and also singing in the kids choir at church. So I started playing piano in third grade, which I would have been around 8. And then I really loved music already from a really little kid. There's pictures of me at Christmas getting some drumsticks and a hat box as a present, like when I was in kindergarten. But yeah, so I took the piano lessons. I started playing trumpet in 5th grade, and my small town, I grew up in Batavia, Illinois, which is sort of near Aurora, Fox River Valley. We had a really good music program in our schools. It's a small town. I really enjoyed it, and I learned so much. And then by around 5th grade, when I was playing the trumpet, that's when I borrowed a guitar from a neighbor kid, and I taught myself how to play guitar with a couple of chord books. And I never had any lessons with the guitar until I was in college, and those were the guy who was my teacher for a while in college was more like a guru to me than a guitar instructor.
So you went to college at University of Wyoming, and I think I heard you say once that you chose that school because it was 1,000 miles away from your parents.
That's correct. I attended the University of Wyoming, which means I did not graduate, but it was really, really cool school. I really liked the place. It wasn't so expensive. They had skiing. I went there kind of because I was really into skiing, alpine skiing, and I ended up teaching for the university as a freshman. And I played in the marching band also in college and played trumpet, and that was really something. When you're playing in a marching band in college, people aren't in the band just because their parents wouldn't let them quit. You know, they're either a music major or, in my case, a marching band fanatic, or at the University of Wyoming, we also had a bunch of guys who were from the Casper Troopers. And the Casper Troopers, nowadays, the drum and bugle corps movement is really large in the United States. But back then, it was a smaller group, and the Casper Troopers were among the elite in the drum and bugle corps ranks. So we had like literally pros in the band with us. It was really exciting.
So I'm guessing it was probably around this time that you were starting to go out and see bands and see some live music.
Yeah, I had the school music program kind of helped me in an odd way when I was living in Batavia, because the guys, I had a little rock band starting from 7th grade, and most of the guys in the band were in the rock band, were also in the school band. And when I got to high school, my buddy Wheels, his dad was our band director, and his mom was the high school secretary. So we were able to get the same study hall time and, kind of get permanent passes to go to the band room during that study hall period. And, a lot of the year we had our gear at school, so we could we're playing while we're at school, and that was pretty great.
Was that the band? Was that the Dirty Dogs, or?
No, this was in high school.
Oh, this was prior to that. Okay.
Yeah, and then when I was in college, I took a couple classes. I took a music theory class, which was super exciting to me. It's fundamentals, like foundational information about music. And I loved the class, and I took the exam, and then I got my grade, and I failed the class. And I went to talk to the guy, and he was like, well, you missed 3 classes, so that's an automatic fail. And I think I had scored like a B+ or something on the test, and I was, well, fuck that, and I took the class again and got even more out of it and totally aced the test, and was given an F again because I missed 3 classes. And that was the end of my music education, formal music education. But it was super helpful, and stuff that I call upon almost every time I pick up an instrument or even listen to music.
So when you started playing in bands or forming bands, I'm familiar with the Dirty Dogs. What was that, the first band that you formed?
Well, that was the first band that made a record, and I had been expelled from college by my parents, not the university, for a semester. And when I came back, I, at the time, Laramie, Wyoming, I think there was only one music store, and they sold instruments, and they had records and stereos. And I was kind of hanging out there, and the way you meet people in the store, and somebody was talking about getting a band together, and I was like, I'll play anything. I'll even play country. And the guy was saying, no, you know what, I'm putting together a punk rock band. And I had already, through just kind of a funny thing, I had won tickets to see these 2 bands I'd never heard of that summer while I was working at home, and they were the Ramones and the Dictators. So I knew what the guy was talking about, and that became the Dirty Dogs. We played a lot of gigs around town, and we eventually made our way to Denver. There's a big record store in Chicago that was started by a couple of English guys, and it was called Wax Trax. They started in Denver, and that's where we went down there to get records, and told the guy about our band, and they started selling our record, and we had made a 45.
Is that Sorority Girl?
Yeah, and they started, they found out that we had a PA system, because one guy in the band, Alex, was a real MacGyver. Back then you couldn't go into, there was no Sweetwater or anything. You couldn't buy a PA system except for like the Shure. Most of the things were like you had to buy the separate pieces, and if you bought the JBL speakers, they came with plans to make the cabinets. You couldn't even buy the cabinets. So that's kind of how that band started and took off. We didn't, when we made our record, this little 45, I tracked down a guy in West Laramie named Rocky, who had a company, Rocky's Recording Service, and he recorded mostly like school bands, but he had a really high-end tape recorder and a few good mics and a small mixer. So he came to our house where we practiced, and he took a feed from our mixer, and then he had some of his own like Neumann mics for the stereo room sound, and that's how we got that record made.
I would love to hear a compilation of that guy's recordings of school bands. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the guy was a classic. He had like the cauliflower nose, and he was just like a cigar chomping guy, and he just came in and set up his stuff and ran a test, and then we played the songs a couple times each, and that was that. We waited a month and we got the 45s.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey, I want to talk about Plug. Plug makes it easy for you to purchase the personal technology you need at 40 to 70% off retail pricing. What can you get from Plug? Certified pre-owned devices including iPhones, Androids, AirPods, Macs, smartwatches, accessories, and more. I originally didn't even want an Apple Watch, but I got one from Plug and I love it. I wear it every day. Your purchase is backed by their unmatched 1-year warranty and 30-day money-back guarantee. One more very cool thing, Plug is dedicated to helping reduce e-waste around the globe. To date, Plug has helped save over 1 million devices from reaching landfills, and they're looking to double that number by 2025. Link to Plug Tech from the show notes, and check out all the great deals and savings on certified pre-owned devices. Plug Electronics. Check it out. So eventually you head out to LA.
Yeah, the band, we had kind of exhausted things, what we could do out there, and we looked at the map, and, it was like LA or New York, and we were coming from a cold place, and it seemed like LA was closer, and so we changed our name because we had been banned by the university, and the university was the best paying gig that you could get. So we changed the name of the band and got one more gig to really make some money before we left town, and then we took off to LA. And out there we played a lot of the places, Club 88, and we eventually started playing the Troubadour, and we met this guy, Danny Holloway, who was a producer who produced the original Plimsolls album, the one that has the song Million Miles Away. And he took us into a real recording studio that was down in Hermosa Beach or something. I think it was owned by the guys from 10cc, but there was they did a lot of like punk rock records from that, and so that was the first time I was ever in a real recording studio, and we made an EP as the Accelerators.
Whenever I would go out there, I used to go out a lot to visit my brother who lives in LA. One of the first things I would do when I would get there was I'd grab an LA Weekly to see what was going on around town. And am I right that it was the LA Weekly where you saw an ad that Joan Jett was looking for band members?
Yeah, I was working I had a day job at a print warehouse that did, they had the big German printing presses and did, posters for B movies. And there was an ad in the paper, Joan Jett is looking for 3 good men.
3 good men.
Yep. And I had been, the guys from Wyoming, that band had broken up quite a while before that. I had been playing with a guy named Rick L. Rick, who was a singer from F Word, and also with a guy named Top Jimmy, who was a sort of rock and roll blues shouter guy who kind of came from the X, he was friends with X. His name was Top Jimmy because he worked at this place, Top Taco, that was right across the street from A&M Records. He was later immortalized in a Van Halen song about him. But we all signed up for this audition, and it was like 150 guys signed up for each position. And the auditions, they did the guitar players, and then they did the bass players. I guess they started with the bass players. And I actually went first, and I really felt like I was going to get this gig, and I had run into Joan at some punk rock gig at maybe Hong Kong Gardens, or and told her, you can have these auditions, but when it's over, I'll be your guitar player, and that's actually how it worked. And somehow, all 3 of the guys, my little band that had backed both Top Jimmy and Rick L. Rick, we recorded with Rick L. Rick on the very first Rodney on the Rocks compilation album. We all won the audition, and I just thought that was, because we were the right guys and we were good and everything. I thought that for like 35 years until a few years ago I went to see X. They usually would play out here just before the holidays. I went to see them, and I was talking to John Doe, who I know, from back in those days, and we played together on the Mojo Nixon's first solo album, the one that Jim Dickinson produced, and John Doe was like, "Did I ever tell you the story about that, the band, the Blackhearts?" I was like, "No." And he said, "Well, when we were holding those auditions, he was playing bass when they were trying out guitar players, and he was playing guitar while they were trying out bass players, to help Joan." And he said that they took a break at some point, and he said to Joan, he's like, "Joan, these guys are all assholes. You're going to have to ride around in a van you don't want to fucking hang around with these fucking guys. Eric and Gary, they have a band. You know them. They're cool. You should just get them. And that's what she did. But I never knew that until 35 years later.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Out of all those guys.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people might assume, wow, this guy played lead guitar for a huge band. Joan Jett and the Blackhearts played the solo on I Love Rock and Roll. He must be doing all right. But when you left L.A. to go to New York, you worked for a while, like laying concrete to save money, right?
Well, with Joan, I moved to New York with Joan, so I didn't do the concrete thing until I had gotten kicked out of the Blackhearts.
I see.
And then I was doing concrete, in the cold winter, Chicago winter of 81 to 82, freezing cold, like getting large coffees to keep my hands warm, listening to the record I played on, climb the charts. It was pretty intense. But, after my experience, as much of a drag as it was to get bounced out of that band, I was, if you watch that movie, the Bad Reputation movie, that original band really was, it really laid the groundwork or foundation that, Joan has still not really gone too far off of the rails of how that was set up, And I liked New York, so I stayed, I went to work construction so I could go back to New York and try to find something for myself to do.
And then at one point you teamed up with Scott Kempner and Frank Finaro?
Yeah, I went, there's some guy, I was trying to bring Rick out to New York, and I had sort of put a band together, and I was playing with some guys, including this drummer Mel Anderson, who had been one of the original members of Twisted Sister. He was a great drummer who he was really into Bevan, and I don't know if it was him or another guy that I had played with. Back then there's no answering machines. Somebody calls you up, you hope you get the phone call. And this guy told me, he's like, yeah, Top 10 from the Dictators, he's starting this band. I went and played with them, and it was like part The Clash and part Chuck Berry, and he's just like, I hated it. It was awful. And I was like, yeah, that sounds awful. And then as soon as I got off the phone, I started trying to figure out, who I knew that knew Scott, so I could go up there because, I had met them. I'd seen the Dictators play at that famous gig with the Ramones at the Ivanhoe in Chicago. I also saw them play in Boulder, after we had the Dirty Dogs, and we went and hung out with them. And so somehow I found the number, and I showed up the same time as Frank did, the same day, and that became the band. And those guys, I don't know if they'd really played a gig or not, but they were calling themselves the Cheatin' Hearts, and I was like, man, I just got out of the Blackhearts. I can't be in another Hearts band. And then we came up with the Del Lords watching the, pre-cable TV. In New York City, they would have starting at like 2 a.m, they would have 3 episodes of the Three Stooges in a row. And we saw produced and directed by Del Lord, in the credits. We're like,
Yeah.
that's it. That's the band.
When I first heard the band name, I got that reference immediately, as I would always notice that name at the beginning of the Stooges, and it's just what a perfect band name. It's a cool name. I love that.
Yeah, we ended up learning a lot about him too. Like, evidently one of his particular talents, he wrote for the show also, but he was exceptional at throwing pies.
Of course.
So when they were getting in pie fights, it was usually him. Like if one of the guys was getting pasted in the face, you didn't see where the pie came from, but it was probably Del himself throwing the pie. So,
Del Lord.
yeah.
Well, this year marked the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and the Del Lord's Frontier Days featured images from the site of the tower. Was it like the construction site, or there was actually you can see the towers on the album art too?
Yeah, we're standing on this. It looks almost like a lunar landscape, but when they built the Twin Towers, they excavated. The building went way down, so they took tons of land out of the ground, and they created a landfill on the west side that became what is today Battery Park City. So we were on our first album, Frontier Days, we were standing on the landfill that would become Battery Park City.
Wow.
And the Twin Towers are in the background.
Well, being a designer, I'm always interested in album cover art. And speaking of Frontier Days, that first Del Lord's album, that was produced by the late, great Lou Whitney, right?
Yes, absolutely. Pivotal.
The Morels and the Skeletons used to play St. Louis a lot, and I would rarely miss an opportunity to go see those guys play.
Yeah, the Lou thing became a pivotal, like a touchstone, keystone for me in my musical life. From the very first time I met those guys, we met them. They played at the Peppermint Lounge, and we had gone there to talk to Lou and give him our demo tape. We heard that he had a studio, and he was like, well, if you can get to Springfield, I'll record you. That's how it started. And on that very first demo trip, that kind of sealed our reputation in St. Louis too, because we had gone down there to record all week, and then we had to stop on Friday because the Morels had a gig at Heartbreak Hotel, and Donnie got sick, so Lou decided that Rongo would drive up there with their PA and all of their equipment, because we just came down there with guitars in a van. We didn't have all our equipment. And we would take the place of the Morels at this gig. And the Morels, 1983, everybody, that was the hottest gig in town, the Morels gig. And there was a sign, and Rongo was at the door, and there was a sign that said, Donnie's sick, the Morels can't play tonight, but Lou has sent the Del Lords from New York City. And that was our, and really for our band, that made St. Louis became a second home almost for us, throughout the band's existence.
That's great. I was at a show one time, and I asked Lou where I might find a copy of the 45 that he and Donnie did. That was a cover of The Ventures' Driving Guitars, and it was back to Sleepwalk. I'd really been trying to hunt that 45 down, and was having a hard time finding it. So Lou, with that wry smile, says to me, say, yeah, I think I got a few copies of that down at column 1. It might be a little warped, but if you just use a damp towel on an ironing board, I think you'll be all right. And I think he was serious. I
Oh
did
yeah,
eventually. I do have, it's one of my prized possessions. In fact, it's got Donnie's D. Clinton Thompson autograph on it. So I
excellent.
do have that 45. Well, another fantastic band that I love from a little town not too far from here, from me, is a band you've done some work with, the Bottle Rockets.
Yes, and yeah, I guess I forget the number. I think I've produced either 6 or 7 albums for them over the years, and there's a lot of things that we did and kind of growing together over the years. But that Heartbreak Hotel gig where we subbed for the Morels, Brian and Tom were at that gig. In fact, they had sat in their car because Casey debuted the ZZ Top album Eliminator that night. So they sat in their car to hear the whole of Eliminator, and then they came to the Del Lords gig.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah, that was probably the 7th day. Casey had I think it was on Sunday nights, they would play an album in its entirety, or albums in their entirety. Wow. Well, I love the Bottle Rockets. I don't know if you've ever seen it. There's a PBS documentary like 20 years ago called River of Song. River of Song? Yeah, that's so good. And I love the segment where the Bottle Rockets show up is pretty cool.
Yeah, they were a great band, with Brian was a very good front man, and they had in addition to his songs, the other people in their axis that contributed song, it was a really good setup.
Well, I had the good fortune of seeing you with the Del Lords at a house concert back in 2013 here in St. Louis. And a couple friends of mine even came in from out of town to see that show. I've heard some musicians say that as much as they love playing, to large audiences, they do really like the experience of playing those house concerts for a variety of reasons. I don't know, maybe it's a more relaxed environment, or maybe just a chance to, try out a new song, or what was your experience with playing house concerts?
I really like them. Every once in a while I see people doing a exclusive house concert tour, where they're playing house concerts every night. And, it's an anecdote, or it's a alternative to playing a club gig, but I don't think it's not, and I love them. They're great. Like you say, they're more informal. You really get to meet the people. You're not there. A lot of clubs you load in and you're greeted by a surly sound man or a bartender that could give a flying fuck, and you're loading your equipment on the sticky floor, and so house concerts, they're almost all pretty great, but they're different. It's not the same as it's a different kind of presentation than on a stage, with that's set up. But I do love them, and I mean they're great, and they're for bands in what I refer to as the cottage level industry. It's good money too, because there's a few unwritten rules of house concerts, and one of the most important ones is you can't call it a house concert if the house is taking any money at all off of the top. So right. When you go to a house concert, whatever you paid, all that money's going to the band, and that's rare in music, period.
Right.
The Rick Wood house concert was, that everybody knows the good ones, and the Rick Wood house concert was one of the best ones and well known by musicians.
Yeah, Rick and Nancy Wood. They're many great shows I've seen over the years, and just really good people. Rick's a great friend. I like Rick a lot.
I would, they had a rule about no repeats, but I'm lucky that I play with enough different people that I've played there quite a few times.
Right. When you told me you'd like to do the show, I kept thinking that this concert, I'm talking about the house concert, I kept thinking that was the only time I would have ever seen you play in person, but then I flashed back and remembered another show 10 years prior to that, back in 2003. Some friends of mine and I made a pilgrimage down to Nashville to see Steve Earle and the Dukes play at the Exit Inn. So if I have my timeline and dates right, you would have been in that band at that time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Exit, that's a great club. I think it got saved, what I refer to as the real estate monster, has been gobbled up New York City. It's been gobbling up Nashville at an alarming speed, and, making, that block that they call the rock block, it was a congregating place, and things like the Gold Rush, you could get out of your car and you could go to like 5 places right there. But I guess the Exit Inn has been saved from the developers' wrecking ball. I mean, that's a pretty great club. A lot of people have played there. And then there's a little bar called The End, which is right next door. I don't know if it's kind of in the alley. I love playing the Exit Inn.
Yeah, I haven't been to a show there in years, but that Exit Inn experience was part of a bachelor party weekend for my good friend Vince Cook, who's also a guitarist, and who met his guitar playing wife, Lori, at an open mic bar up in Chicago. So, nice. Hey, Vinny. Hey, Lori. We got to say hello to those guys.
Nice.
Oh, one more thing about the Steve Earle years I wanted to mention. One of my favorite songs you played guitar on is America version 6.0 from Jerusalem. You played that, right?
Yeah, and that song, we had been working on that song. We didn't play it live, but we had been working on it at sound checks on the road, and we would go out on tour for 3 or 4 weeks, and then there'd be a break, and then there'd be another run. And at that point, we were on the bus. Maybe we had one more gig, and then we were headed home. And out of the blue, Steve said, yeah, well, we're going to record that at Roscoe's place before we split up again. And I was like, what? So, I had my recording studio, Cowboy Technical Services, since 1999. But at the time, Steve would have been the most high-profile person to be there. And all of my... we're in our 3rd location now, but all of our places have been set up in a non-traditional sort of no control room type setup where the band is literally in the same room with the console. And, so that's a little more known nowadays. Back then, people heard of Daniel Lanois doing that in a house in New Orleans, but it wasn't that common. So, it was a little nerve-wracking to both play on that and have to put the recording situation together. We had to rent some equipment, too, because Steve's longtime engineer and producer, Ray Kennedy, wanted us to use a specific type of compressor, the old 1176, so we had to rent a bunch of 1176s, and that song came out great, and I had just gotten a new snare drum. And in the intro, it's just the song starts out with just the drums, and I had gotten this new snare drum, and that day after we cut the song, Will Rigby goes, "Gosh, look at this!" And you know how the bottom head is clear very often, and one of the lug screws, every time he hit the drum, there's like this rattling because the nut had come off of the lug screw, and it's next time you listen to it, listen closely to the intro, and you can hear this nut bouncing around on the drum head every time he hits a snare drum.
I will put the headphones on and listen to that again.
You'll hear it. It sounds like he's dragging his stick on the head, but it's not a drag. It's actually that nut bouncing around.
And here all this time, I thought that was intentional. So. That was Eric's guitar work on the track Sensitive Kind by J.J. Cale. Eric released some musical nuggets during the pandemic as the Shut-In Single Series. Hear more of that series at ericambel.com. I confess I'm one of those guys who plays guitar, has a few guitars, but doesn't really know much about the inner workings of a guitar. But a couple of years ago, before the whole 2020 lockdown, I was in a band that got together once a week to play. We never went anywhere. We never played out, but we got together to play mostly for fun. And at that time, I had been experiencing some like really bad neck and upper back pain. Just a bad experience with that. And two of the guitars I have are pretty heavy, so that didn't help. And where I'm going with this is I started learning about her. I was looking into, I didn't know whether, there was a specific back harness or strap or something. I felt kind of pathetic at the time. I was like, what could I do to like take some of the weight off? And then I started learning a little bit about chambered guitars that are made, they not only produce a different sound, but I guess there are sections of the body that are routed out and it also makes them considerably lighter. And I think I've heard you talk about that same thing with the chamber guitars.
Yeah, I had similar spinal problems, trouble, to the point eventually I had to have surgery, but I kind of worked on, when I was playing with Steve, I got into riding bicycles, and I got into kind of working on bicycles, and as the Wright brothers would tell you, that if you can work on a bicycle, you can work on almost anything. And at the same time, I had played a couple of Gretsch guitars, and I learned about the chambering from them. And I started going through everything in my rig to make it lighter if I could, the way cyclists do. And so some of the things I would do is I found a guy who made, amp cabinets, replacement cabinets out of pine instead of plywood or particle board. It would take drastic amount of weight off of the amp. And that's the way the old amps, from the 50s and 60s, they didn't use plywood. They used pine, and it sounded, pardon me, it sounded great, and it was much lighter. And there's a type of speaker called a Neo speaker, which also can take a lot of weight off. And then these chambered guitars, I had been working with a company, this builder in Wyoming. He's moved around a lot now. I think he's in Washington now, but Stone Tree Guitars, and he built me a chambered guitar. And then since then, I found that Gibson was making them. The custom shop makes a really, you can get a chambered Les Paul, and I have a couple of those, and they, the weight comes down by a couple of pounds, and the difference between a 9-pound guitar and a 7-pound guitar is pretty drastic.
Sure.
So at this point I have a couple Stone Trees that are chambered. I have chambered Les Pauls. I have a guitar by this custom maker called Swope that is also chambered. And in addition to the weight savings, I think they just sound great. Like the Stone Tree ones have a spruce top like an acoustic guitar, and the Les Pauls with the chambering, this is very confusing because Gibson also does a thing called weight relief, which is that's because they can't find wood that's light enough for the guitars, so they just cut holes in it. And when they first started doing it, these were just like, it looked like Swiss cheese. They just cut these 2-inch holes in the body but the chambered ones, it's actually a tone chamber that goes around the sides of the guitar. And if you've ever been lucky enough to play a real Les Paul from, a pre-1960 Les Paul, those guitars are made with old growth mahogany that usually lighter and has they're drier. They just have a more of a character than the sort of heavy, more generic Les Paul that the company made from 1968 on, when they started making Les Pauls again. And I think that I just love the chambered guitars. If you go online, there's a lot of guys who will tell you why you shouldn't play a chambered guitar, but most of those are not, they're like keyboard warriors, and they're not professional musicians or guys who play gigs or record. It's really something else. Billy Gibbons, that's all he plays, unless he's got his old guitar out there, which he rarely takes.
Well, I love New York, and one thing I really regret is that I never got to experience Lakeside Lounge.
Well, that was a funny thing. My partner, the Hound, Jim Marshall, he had a radio show on WFMU, throughout the 80s and early 90s. Just a fantastic, rollicking radio show, record collector, but irreverent, crazy. I used to do a segment on there, the State of the Vibe Report. But we helped a lot of places get going. Like there was a club, Brownies, and also the Mercury Lounge. But, those clubs, I had a hand in the design of the Mercury Lounge, and, the Brownies, my band played maybe the very first gig at Brownies when they didn't even, that was just a bar, and they had this raised area in the back with the English dart set up, and we were like, hey, I think we could set up and play a gig in here, So we had done enough for other people promoting their place. We were like, I think it's time to have our own bar, and we found this location, and it was just it only took us, I think, 5 weeks from when we signed the lease to being open. And the Bottle Rockets played the opening night. We just had tons of great people play there over the years. A lot of bands that from the area would play their first gig there. And then we had a lot of famous people too, because friends that we knew from all over the country would go and do like TV shows, like Letterman, and then they'd come down. Those shows are taped at 5:00, so then they got the whole night, and a lot of them would come down and play the gig at our place. It was pretty ideal. Eventually we got sort of the real estate monster, like I said, gobbled us up. When we opened, our rent was $2,200, and when we left, the rent, 16 years later, the rent was $11,000 a month.
Yikes!
In that period, we had raised the price of a beer $1. So it just and also at the time, I think when we closed, I think it was 2014, but we also started to see the writing on the wall. Awful lot of people were moving to Brooklyn, and so we started doing some happy hour shows so people could come down right from work before they went home for the night. It's I always thought, wouldn't it be great to have your own little bar in some small town and have the equipment there so the place would be ready to go if somebody wanted to play. And then at one point I realized, wow, I did that in New York City. I did that in the East Village for 16 years, and all kinds of people played there, so.
I do love that the site is still up, so you can go look at this pretty long list of great bands and artists who played there over the years. It's very cool.
Yeah, and we also have our the list of what was on the jukebox at the time the place closed is still on there.
Oh, nice.
And that was it. Our jukebox was the definite star of the place.
Is there a band or a musician that you really like that might surprise some people?
Well, I don't know. I talked about the marching band thing. I love a lot of different kinds of music, and I learned so much from playing, learning to play the piano and trumpet. And I guess what you're asking is some kind of guilty pleasure thing.
Not necessarily, but yeah, sure.
But Glenn Campbell, that's somebody that I always liked. And then to have him, that last album that he made with the guy Julian Raymond, the producer, the Ghost on the Canvas, I mean, that's an unbelievable, that's like a career high record almost for a guy to do that when he's starting to feel the effects of dementia.
Right.
Just beyond me. I also I really like Lindsey Buckingham. There's almost always something that I can find on one of his records, and if I was kind of the impromptu DJ at a party, I can't imagine too much time going without me playing one of those two artists, or maybe something like some Cheap Trick, just because that's where I'm from.
Well, you've been an incredibly busy and prolific musician and producer for many years now. What's your next project? What's the next project for Eric Ambel?
Well, I've always got a few going at the same time. Recently at Cowboy Technical, we had to have there's some foundation work being done on the building. So we had to kind of decommission our space while they go in there. And the positive thing is that, to use a phrase of the current president, that we're going to build back better. But the right now we merged with another friend who has a recording studio in the same building. But so there's no work interruption, and we've got some of our stuff up there. But I did the recording for maybe 3 or 4 albums before we decommissioned our place. So now I'm working on all those records to get them finished. There's the various overdubs and editing before you go to mixing. So like right now I have records, a Sarah Borges record that's ready to mix, artist Jerry Joseph that I produced. His record is almost ready to mix. There's things that came out recently, Emily Duff and Ward Hayden and Outliers, and also Eric Huey record. So I'm kind of working on the sort of tasters for those to get them ready for mixing. Since the pandemic, I have not played a single gig yet. I'm just have been waiting for things to be safe.
Sure.
Not just for myself, but for people that go to gigs and people that work at the venues. So New York City, they have a vaccine passport app, the Excelsior Pass, and they just today, I think, is the first day that they're, all bars and restaurants and gyms, a couple other things require a vaccine to get in starting today.
As they should.
So, yeah, I have a gig that I play. There's a guy that I produced named Mark McKay, and he has a regular gig at this place, the 11th Street Bar. It's East Village Irish bar. And so I'm playing with him in a couple of weeks, and I'm hoping everything goes okay.
Well, Eric, I can't thank you enough for being a guest on the show.
My pleasure, Dave. Thank you.